There are beginnings that don't feel like beginnings. They don't arrive with energy. They don't announce themselves with confidence. They show up as a quiet internal shift while everything still looks the same from the outside. The same responsibilities, the same routines, the same face you know how to wear when you need to appear steady. And yet something underneath the surface has already stopped cooperating. It can be hard to admit this, because the mind expects change to look a certain way. It expects a decision, a plan, a surge, something you can point to and say, this is where it started. But real change often begins before any of that. It begins in a subtler place, where your usual strategies no longer work the way they used to, where the old version of you starts failing at the job it was trained to do. You might still be functioning, you might still be showing up, but the effort feels different. Not heavier in a simple way, like you just need rest. More like the effort is no longer being rewarded with meaning. You do what you've always done, and it doesn't create the same internal response. The satisfaction doesn't land. The motivation doesn't return. The familiar sense of purpose feels distant, as if it's coming from another room. This is why the earliest phase can feel like confusion, even though it isn't. The mind looks for proof of progress and finds none. It looks for visible movement and sees only the same life. So it doubts. It doubts you, and it doubts the shift, and it starts trying to explain the discomfort away. It calls it laziness. It calls it weakness. It calls it a mood. Anything that makes the invisible beginning feel less real. But exhaustion has a particular honesty when it comes from an old cycle ending. There's physical tiredness, and then there's the kind of exhaustion that happens when you've been carrying a life that no longer fits. You can sleep and still feel depleted. You can take time off and still feel hollow. Because what's draining you isn't time or effort in general. It's the specific effort of staying aligned with something you've already outgrown internally. When that exhaustion appears, it doesn't always feel like you're about to rise. It can feel like you're about to lose something. It can feel like the floor is thinning beneath the old identity you depended on, the one who could keep going, the one who could handle it, the one who could push through anything. And then comes the moment, sometimes sudden, sometimes slow, where you hit an inner limit. It's not always dramatic. It might be a morning where you wake up and the thought of continuing the same way feels impossible. Not in a theatrical sense, in a quiet, non-negotiable sense. Or it might be a series of small failures to perform your usual strength. You try to activate the old engine and it doesn't respond. You try to summon discipline and it feels like you're pulling on an empty rope. This is the place people label as collapse. From the outside, it can look like a breakdown, like you lost your momentum, like you couldn't hold it together. But inside, something else can be happening at the same time, something almost contradictory, a strange relief, not happiness, not optimism, just the release of a pressure you didn't realize you were maintaining every day. Because the inner limit is often the end of an agreement you never consciously signed. An agreement to keep enduring even when endurance became self-betrayal. An agreement to keep proving you can carry what is slowly killing your sense of yourself. An agreement to keep being the old version because it's familiar, because others expect it, because you don't know what would happen if you stopped. When you reach nothing left, it doesn't always mean you're empty. It can mean the old strategy has been drained. The old identity has run out of fuel. The old way of forcing your life forward has reached its expiration. What looked like collapse can be the removal of what couldn't go forward with you. That removal doesn't feel clean. It can feel humiliating, even if no one else sees it, because it strips away the part of you that relied on effort as proof of worth. It takes away the ability to solve your way out of discomfort through intensity. It forces you into a quieter reality where you can no longer outrun yourself. And after that, a different state arrives. Detachment. Detachment doesn't feel like a comeback at first. It feels like distance, like emotional quiet, like your reactions are muted. The things that used to trigger you still happen, but they don't hook into you the same way. or they hook in for a moment and then slip away without starting a war inside your chest. This can be unsettling because struggle has a way of making you feel alive. Anxiety, urgency, overthinking, constant internal pressure, none of it feels good, but it feels familiar. It gives shape to the day. It gives you something to wrestle with. When that intensity fades, the mind sometimes interprets it as numbness, as if something essential has shut off. But there's a kind of quiet that isn't numbness. It's the silence that comes after a long inner fight stops. Not because you won, but because the fight no longer makes sense. Because the part of you that used to participate in that struggle is stepping back. It's withdrawing energy from the old narrative. At first, this can feel empty, like you're floating slightly outside your own life, like you're watching yourself do things instead of being fully inside them. And in a way, that's true. You are stepping back. You are creating space. Space appears before momentum does. The mind hates this order. It wants momentum first. It wants the excitement, the certainty, the clear direction. But the deeper system doesn't work like that. It clears first. It loosens attachments. It quiets the old responses. It makes room. That room can feel like loneliness even if you're not alone, because you're no longer being propelled by the same internal noise. You're no longer being driven by the same fears. You're not constantly reacting. And without reaction, you notice how much of your previous life was built around managing, fixing, proving, staying ahead of your own discomfort. Detachment, then, is not disconnection. It's reclamation. Your energy begins to return from places it was constantly leaking. Your attention becomes less scattered. You may find yourself less available for emotional recruitment, less interested in pointless urgency, less willing to be pulled into dynamics that depend on your overfunctioning. This doesn't make you better than anyone. It just means your system has changed its terms. And then, inevitably, identity becomes the next unstable thing. Because if you can't come back as who you were, what are you coming back as? A true comeback doesn't restore the old self. It doesn't return you to the version of you that survived by force. It makes that version feel too small to live in. You might still be able to perform it if you need to. You can still slip into the role. You can still do what's expected. But it costs too much now. The body knows. The nervous system knows. Something in you tightens the moment you try. This is the discomfort of realizing you've outgrown former roles. The achiever role, the caretaker role, the one who holds it together, the one who never needs anything, the one who stays pleasant, the one who adapts, the one who pushes, the one who can always find a way. When those roles start dissolving, you can feel oddly undefined. Not lost in the dramatic sense, but unanchored. You may notice that you hesitate before committing to things you once did automatically. You may realize that certain conversations drain you more quickly now. Certain environments feel louder. Certain expectations feel heavier. You can't always explain why. You just know you're less willing. Identity dissolves before it reorganizes. And in that gap, the mind panics. It wants a new label, a new plan, a new story to restore control. It wants something that looks like progress so it can relax. But forcing a new identity too early often recreates the old one with better vocabulary. Different surface, same inner contract. The future self influences you before you can describe them. You feel it as a shift in tolerance, a change in what you can't pretend anymore, a subtle refusal to keep paying the same emotional price. It shows up as restraint, as quietness, as a new relationship with urgency. It shows up in small decisions that don't look heroic, but feel strangely final inside. And this is where the invisible beginning becomes undeniable. Not because you suddenly feel strong, because the old version stopped working. And something deeper, something quieter, has started arranging your life from the inside. And because it begins there, in that internal rearranging, it can feel almost impossible to describe to anyone else. Not because it's secret, but because it doesn't present as a clear story. There's no clean before and after. There's a quiet middle where the old way has loosened and the new way hasn't become legible yet. And in that middle, the mind keeps reaching for evidence the way a hand reaches for a railing in the dark. Evidence rarely arrives early. Early progress often has no visible proof because it's happening below the surface, in places that don't announce themselves publicly. It's happening in the way your nervous system stops bracing for the same things, in the way certain habits no longer deliver comfort, even if they still deliver distraction, in the way you hesitate before repeating a pattern that used to be automatic, in the way your body responds faster than your explanations can. This can feel like nothing. The mind equates nothing with danger. It starts asking whether you're wasting time, whether you're falling behind, whether you're losing your ambition, your edge, your capacity to build a life. It asks why you don't feel more certain if you're truly changing. It asks why you don't feel more hopeful if this is a comeback. It tries to convert the quiet into a problem, because a problem is something it knows how to solve. But there's a difference between quiet and stagnation. The quiet that appears after a long inner struggle can be a kind of recovery. The system stops generating noise because it's no longer trying to outrun itself. It begins conserving energy instead of burning it just to feel in control. And that conservation can look, on the surface, like you're doing less, like you're waiting, like you've lost drive. What's actually shifting is the kind of movement you trust. The old engine created momentum through pressure, through urgency, through fear disguised as hooking motivation, through self-criticism that kept you moving because stopping felt unsafe. When that engine begins to fail, you lose not only momentum, but the familiar sensation of being propelled. The absence of propulsion can feel like you're sliding backward, when you're actually just no longer being whipped forward by the same internal force. This is why the silent phase is where people quit. Not because they're weak, but because the mind cannot tolerate a process that doesn't produce immediate proof. It wants a sign that the discomfort is worth it. It wants reassurance that you're not making a mistake by not forcing yourself back into the old posture. And when it can't find reassurance, it reaches for what it knows. It reaches for the habits that recreate a familiar baseline. Not necessarily destructive habits. Often they look respectable. Overworking, over-planning, over-explaining, filling every gap with activity, grabbing at clarity too early, declaring a new identity before anything has settled, making a public commitment to progress so you feel obligated to perform it. Anything that turns uncertainty into something measurable. The danger isn't that these things are inherently wrong. The danger is why they happen. If they're driven by the need to escape the quiet, they usually bring you back to the same contract, the same architecture, the same inner arrangement that burned out the old version of you in the first place. And because the old version is no longer fully available, that return never feels the same again. It feels heavier, more brittle, more expensive. This is where patience becomes something deeper than waiting. Not patience as positivity, not patience as a promise that everything will work out. Patience as restraint, as a refusal to force outcomes before your inner system can hold them, as the willingness to let the process remain private long enough to become real. There are moments in this phase that are almost too subtle to count, and yet they change everything. A moment when you feel the urge to rush, and you don't. A moment when you feel compelled to fix something immediately, and you let it be for a few breaths longer. A moment when you notice the familiar panic rising, and you don't treat it like an emergency. You don't conquer it. You simply don't hand it the entire steering wheel. Those moments don't create fireworks. They create a new baseline. And baseline change is the kind of progress that feels invisible until it's not. You may not notice it day to day. You notice it later, when something happens that used to pull you apart, and it doesn't. Or it pulls you for a second, and then the grip loosens. Or you feel yourself tempted to return to an old pattern, and something inside you quietly refuses, not as discipline, but as incompatibility. That's the strange thing about realignment. It rarely feels like an exciting choice. It feels like a door you can't walk through anymore, even if you remember what was on the other side. You can still see it, you can still imagine it, but something in you doesn't fit. This is why the mind keeps demanding proof before it offers trust. Trust feels risky when you can't explain what's happening, and yet, the body often begins trusting first. Not in a dramatic way, in micro relaxations. In the way you exhale more fully when you stop pretending. In the way your shoulders drop in a moment that used to tighten them. In the way your sleep changes slightly when you stop forcing yourself into a rhythm that isn't yours anymore. It's not that everything becomes peaceful. It's that the peace becomes more specific, more tied to truth, less tied to performance. And then, sometimes, you find a message like this. Not because it's magical, because it matches a stage you've reached. There are certain ideas that bounce off you when you're not ready, no matter how accurate they are. They sound like theory, like someone else's experience, like something you can agree with intellectually while staying unchanged. Then one day, the same words land differently. They don't feel like advice. They feel like recognition. Like something inside you already knew, but couldn't name. Like language arriving late to a process that started without language. That's what timing can feel like. Personal, specific, not random in the way your mind likes to believe. The unconscious often recognizes readiness before awareness does. It shifts your attention towards certain things, certain patterns, certain truths, because you're finally at the point where seeing them won't destroy you. You didn't find this message as much as you reached the psychological place where it could reach you. And if that's true, then it says something important about what's already underway. Not that you're done, not that you've arrived, just that the process has traction now. Even if you can't measure it, even if you can't prove it to anyone, even if you have days where you doubt the entire thing and wonder whether you're just tired and confused, that doubt doesn't cancel the shift. It's part of the shift. The mind doesn't surrender control all at once. It circles back. It checks old exits. It revisits familiar fears. It tries to reassert authority by making the uncertainty sound like a problem. But there is a different kind of strength that begins forming here. Not the strength of pushing, the strength of not interfering. Interference doesn't always look like sabotage. It often looks like trying to speed up what can't be sped up, trying to force motivation to appear on command, trying to convert the comeback into something you can show, something you can explain, something you can justify, trying to rebuild the same identity quickly because being undefined feels like danger. The discipline in this phase is quieter than that. It's the discipline of not returning to the old patterns simply because they are familiar. Not using urgency as a substitute for direction. Not confusing intensity with meaning. Not mistaking the absence of proof for the absence of movement. Because the process already in motion doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to stop dragging it back into the old architecture. There will still be moments where you want to interfere. Moments where you want to fix the discomfort by making a decision you're not ready to make. Moments where you want to prove to yourself that you're fine by overperforming your way out of uncertainty. Moments where you miss the old you, because at least that version knew how to function cleanly, even if it was costly. Those moments are human. They don't make you wrong. What changes is how much authority they have. A comeback that lasts isn't built through dramatic reinvention. It's built through quiet non-return. Through many small choices you don't even call choices at first. Through an accumulating refusal to abandon yourself again. Through the slow emergence of momentum that doesn't come from pressure. Momentum without evidence is strange, because it feels like moving before you can explain why. It feels like saying no to things you can't fully justify. It feels like being drawn toward quieter forms of alignment that don't look impressive, but feel clean. It feels like your life reorganizing itself around a new internal baseline, even while the outer circumstances lag behind. And there is often a lag. Outer life doesn't reorganize at the same speed as inner life. The inner shift happens first. The outer changes follow later, sometimes much later. That gap is where people assume nothing is happening, because they're still looking for the comeback to be public, visible, confirmed. They're waiting for the world to agree before they trust what they already feel. But the comeback didn't start when the world changed. That is an internal event. Quiet, unprovable, real. And if that's where it began, then it makes sense that the work now is not to manufacture a new version on demand, but to allow the new baseline to become stable. To let your identity reorganize without forcing it into a label too early. To let your nervous system learn safety in a new rhythm. To let the future self influence your choices without demanding they make perfect sense right away. Nothing about this needs to be rushed into certainty. Certainty is often what the old version chased, because certainty made performance easier. But what's forming now doesn't rely on certainty. It relies on coherence. And coherence arrives gradually, through lived consistency, not through one decisive moment. There may come a day when you look back and realize the return didn't happen the way you imagined. There was no dramatic turnaround, no clean victory. There were just many quiet moments where you didn't go back. Many quiet moments where you let the old pattern pass without renewing it. Many quiet moments where you allowed the process to remain in motion, even while the mind demanded proof. And it might still not feel like a finish line. It might feel more like a new relationship with yourself. Less force, less self-betrayal, less need to prove that you're improving. More willingness to let the internal truth lead, even when it leads slowly. If anything is true here, it's that what has started doesn't need to be pushed into existence. It needs to be protected from interference. Not with fear, not with rigidity, just with the quiet understanding that the comeback is already underway, and the most important part of it is often the part no one else can see.